Thank you for joining me for Storytime with Tanya for part 1 of the Thankful Season. Melissa Carter felt her stomach tighten into a knot as she turned onto the narrow lane that led to her parents' house. Tall maple trees arched overhead. Their crimson and amber leaves drifted like embers, piling in soft mounds at the curbs. A chill breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. In the passenger seat, Sprinkles, her tiny white furred companion, balanced on her haunches, pressing her wet nose to the glass as if she could already taste the aromas waiting inside, her tail thumping against the door in eager anticipation. On the back seat, 2 glossy bakery boxes held pies that wobbled precariously with every curve. Melissa watched them slide across the leather bench and winced. She could almost hear David's teasing. Not homemade again, huh? He'd arrive later with some artisanal concoction, perhaps a lavender-infused mashed sweet potato or miso gravy hybrid, and present it as though he'd reinvented Thanksgiving. Melissa wasn't too concerned, as she had finally surrendered the family gold medal of martyrdom. These pies, crust and all, were simply proof that she'd shown up. Even so, as the familiar weathered siding of her childhood home came into view, her nerves hummed like a wayside carnival's cracked kazoo, an adolescent dread she hadn't felt in years. Before she could even unlatch her seatbelt, the front door swung open and her mother, Elaine, hurried down the creaking steps, flour-dusted apron fluttering around her hips. "You're here!" she exclaimed, enveloping Melissa in a hug that smelled of nutmeg, roasting turkey, and warm vanilla. The embrace was so effortlessly comforting that Melissa closed her eyes and let the years fall away. Inside, the house roared with life. Pots and pans clattered on the stove. The oven let out a sharp hiss as if announcing its readiness, and the muted commentary of a football game buzzed from the living room TV. Laughter tumbled from the kitchen as steam spiraled under the range hood. The air was rich with the scent of melting butter, sautéed onions, a swirl of cinnamon, along with a hint of something slightly charred. In his favorite leather recliner, her father, Frank, lounged with the remote in one hand and a paper-thin plate of potato chips balanced on his round belly. He gave the screen a sideward glance, then granted Melissa a casual one-handed wave. "Well, if it isn't my favorite prodigal daughter," he drawled, without missing a play as Sprinkles streaked past him, yapping at the jumbled pile of coats and sneakers by the front hall. Frank grinned and threw her a little chip. "Dad, she doesn't need that," Melissa scolded, scooping the eager pup lovingly in her arms. He winked at her and grinned as he replied, "Everyone deserves a treat on Thanksgiving." Despite herself, Melissa laughed. The front door opened again, and in swept David, carrying a tall glass jar wrapped in a pristine kitchen towel as though it contained a priceless artifact. He set it on the counter with a flourish that sent soft light glinting through the deep red cranberry bourbon sauce inside. "Behold, cranberry bourbon sauce," reduced to perfection, he proclaimed, stepping back as if the overhead light shined on his creation. Elaine offered polite applause, though her gaze drifted longingly to the golden turkey resting on the carving board. Frank growled in approval at the TV, but when his eyes flicked to Melissa, she caught that familiar boyish grin, the same one he'd worn since they were kids, whenever he succeeded in winding her up. She rolled her eyes, and that made him grin even more. David surveyed the counter, his gaze settling on the bakery boxes. "Store-bought pies again?" he teased, arching an eyebrow. Arms crossed, Melissa lifted her chin. "At least my pies didn't require a fire extinguisher last year." "That was a noble experiment," he countered. "Greatness requires risk." "So do trips to the emergency room," she shot back. Their mother's sharp look silenced them both. "If you two don't behave, you'll be cleaning up after your cousin's finger painting later." Instant obedience fell over them. Proof that certain childhood threats never lose their power. By mid-afternoon, the house brimmed with sound. Cousins sprawled on the living room carpet, faces illuminated by phone screens. Aunts and uncles bustled through doorways, each juggling heavy casserole dishes and complaints about traffic. At the far end of the hall, Grandma Ruth shuffled in, leaning on her slender cane, her soft voice announcing, "Well, this might be my last Thanksgiving," a refrain she'd repeated every single year for the past decade. Frank kissed her wrinkled cheek reverently. "Then we'll make it the best one yet." At last, the clamor subsided, and everyone gathered around the long farmhouse table, its surface nearly obscured by platters, bowls, and the soft glow of a few votive candles. Elaine raised her hands, calling for silence. "Before we eat, let's go around and say what we're thankful for." Melissa's heart thudded. She always dreaded this moment, this forced spotlight, worried that her words would sound trite or hollow. Frank spoke first, grinning over his wife's basil-infused stuffing. "I'm thankful for football, gravy, and my family, in that order." Laughter rippled around the table. David followed earnestly. "I'm grateful for my new job and for this cranberry bourbon sauce, which I believe deserves its own holiday." More chuckles. One by one, voices joined in for health, for children thriving in school, for the roof over their heads, and for Grandma Ruth's enduring presence. When it was Melissa's turn, silence settled like a soft blanket. She glanced at her father's easy smile, her mother's warm, sparkling eyes, and her brother's familiar smirk. The delicate folds of her grandmother's hands on the linen runner. Even Sprinkles looked up from her curled position at Melissa's feet as if expecting her cue. "I'm just grateful," Melissa began in a low voice, "for being here, having this table to come home to, and for all of you, just as you are." The room held its breath, a quiet so full it felt almost sacred. Elaine reached across the table and squeezed Melissa's hand as her eyes glistened. Dinner unfolded in its usual blend of chaos and comfort. Elbows nudging elbows, forks clattering against china, and a sudden splash of water as someone passed the pitcher. and Sprinkles, gleefully barking each time a crumb dropped near her territory. David's sauce earned polite nods, though Grandma Ruth, half hidden by her napkin, whispered loud enough for half the table, "Tastes like medicine." Though none of it mattered. The imperfect pastries, the noise, the one pie's slightly burnt edge. What truly mattered was this. For one golden afternoon, the Carter family sat shoulder to shoulder, bound by love, memory, and tradition, reminded of the simple, fleeting gift of being together. Thank you for joining me for Storytime with Tanya for part 1 of The Thankful Season. The story continues next week.